Imagine, your work vehicle dies on the worst possible day imaginable. You pull onto the shoulder and stare at rising smoke. Today's deliveries stop instantly, but your bills keep moving. The tow truck arrives before you even understand what happened. Hours later, the mechanic finally walks toward you, holding paperwork. The repair bill is $3,900. You open your banking app, hoping for some miracle. The screen shows less than $100 remaining. But here's the part that makes your stomach drop. You already owe money almost everywhere you can borrow. If this feels painfully familiar, you're not alone. Millions of hardworking people wake up early and still fall behind. They work longer hours, but the numbers never seem to cooperate. Every paycheck arrives, but somehow disappears even faster. The problem isn't always laziness, spending, or bad intentions. Sometimes the math quietly breaks long before anyone notices. Ethan thought working harder would eventually solve everything, but every extra mile only seemed to create another problem. What happened next forced him to look at money differently, and his story is only beginning. Before the breakdown changed everything, Ethan Carter believed hard work could solve almost any problem. At 32 years old, he spent most mornings waking up before sunrise. While most of Phoenix was still asleep, Ethan was already getting ready for work. For nearly 6 years, he had worked as a delivery driver, rarely missing a shift. His co-workers respected him because he was always the first person to arrive. One of those co-workers was Marcus Reed, a friend who somehow stayed calm no matter what happened. Outside of work, Ethan's biggest priority was helping his family whenever they needed him. His younger sister Ava often called when life became overwhelming. His mother Linda was getting older, and Ethan worried about her more than she realized. Most days felt normal, but hidden beneath the routine was a financial problem quietly growing larger every month. Every Friday, Ethan promised himself that next month would finally be different. But when payday arrived, most of the money already had somewhere else to go. Rent took the first piece. The credit cards took another. The personal loan grabbed what was left. Then the small expenses started showing up, one after another. A few dollars here never felt dangerous. A few dollars there never felt important. But together, they quietly emptied his account every single month. And Ethan still had no idea how close he was to running out of options. That night, Ethan finally decided to add everything together. He opened every credit card statement he had been avoiding for months. The total was worse than he expected. For years, he thought he was managing the problem. Now, he realized the problem had been managing him. The next morning, his delivery van made a strange sound he had never heard before. A few hours later, the engine suddenly lost power. By sunset, Ethan was sitting inside a repair shop waiting room with less than $100 in his account. Then the mechanic walked over, holding a repair estimate, and he asked a question Ethan had no answer for. How do you plan to pay for this? For a few seconds, Ethan couldn't say anything. The mechanic waited, but Ethan still had no answer. Because the truth was simple. He didn't have $3,900. He barely had enough money to make it through the week. And standing there, Ethan realized this problem hadn't started today. It had started 4 years ago. 4 years of waking up early. 4 years of working longer hours. And 4 years of running as fast as he could, while falling further behind. The mechanic finally broke the silence. He offered Ethan a payment plan through a financing company. The interest rate was terrible, but Ethan didn't have another choice. By signing a few papers, he solved today's emergency and created tomorrow's problem. As Ethan drove home, the repair bill became one more debt added to an already growing pile. The next morning, his alarm clock rang at 4:45 a.m., just like always. Because debt doesn't care how tired you are. and neither did Ethan's delivery route. Month after month, Ethan kept making the minimum payments. The balances moved so slowly that it felt like running on a treadmill. No matter how hard he worked, the finish line never got closer. So whenever an emergency appeared, he used credit cards to survive. Then he worked overtime to pay them back. Then another emergency arrived, and the cycle started again. The person who saw it happening most clearly was Ava. She had helped Ethan more times than he wanted to admit, but one evening, she finally asked a question he wasn't ready to hear. "If nothing changes, Ethan, where does this end?" 3 days after his conversation with Ava, Ethan stopped for coffee before work. It was a normal morning, at least it felt normal. He grabbed his phone and tapped his card against the payment terminal. A second later, the screen flashed a message he had never seen before. Transaction declined. Ethan tried again. Declined. Confused, he opened his banking app, and what he saw made his stomach drop. His account balance was negative. Standing in the coffee shop, Ethan started scrolling through his transactions. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed a small subscription charge he didn't recognize. A few swipes later, he found another one, and another. Most of them were inexpensive on their own, but month after month, they had quietly continued charging his account. Some were services he barely used anymore. Others were things he had completely forgotten existed. For the first time, Ethan realized his money wasn't disappearing all at once. It was leaking away, a few dollars at a time. Ethan immediately started canceling every subscription he could find, but the damage had already been done. When he refreshed his account again, a new charge appeared. An overdraft fee had been added overnight. Then he noticed another payment scheduled for the next morning. There wasn't enough money to cover it. If the payment went through, another fee would follow. If it bounced, his credit score could take another hit. For the first time, Ethan wasn't worried about next month. He was worried about tomorrow morning. His phone rang before he even reached the delivery warehouse. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number from another state. Ethan ignored it and walked inside. A minute later, the phone rang again. Then it rang a third time. By lunchtime, he had received 6 calls from different numbers. Every voicemail sounded almost identical. This was no longer a problem hiding in his bank account. Someone was actively trying to collect money from him. And tomorrow's payment was still less than 24 hours away. The calls stopped feeling like interruptions and started feeling like shadows. Every time Ethan looked at his phone, there was another missed call waiting. He stopped answering numbers he didn't recognize, but that didn't stop the notifications from piling up. Even while making deliveries, his attention kept drifting back to the screen. The stress followed him from the warehouse to the road and back home again. That night, sleep came in short fragments instead of hours. Before sunrise, he checked his bank account for the 5th time. The scheduled payment was still pending, and the collection calls were already starting again. The payment was supposed to process at 8 a.m. Ethan refreshed the banking app before leaving for work. A few seconds later, the status changed. The payment had failed. Within minutes, another penalty fee appeared on the account. The balance dropped even further into the negative. That afternoon, a new email arrived with the word "urgent" in the subject line. When Ethan opened it, his chest tightened. The lender was demanding immediate action. And 2 days later, a physical warning letter arrived at his apartment door. The warning letter sat on Ethan's kitchen table long after he got home. Instead of opening another banking app, he grabbed a notebook. For the first time in years, he decided to write down every expense. He started with rent, then utilities, then gas for the delivery van. The list kept growing faster than he expected. When he finished the fixed expenses, he moved to the smaller purchases: coffee, snacks, Convenience store stops and quick meals filled another page. And when he finally totaled everything, the number shocked him. The biggest problem wasn't the rent or the utilities. It wasn't even the overdraft fees. The real damage was hiding inside dozens of small purchases. A few dollars here and a few dollars there had quietly become hundreds every month. Coffee stops alone cost more than Ethan expected. Convenience store snacks added another painful total. Food deliveries were worse than both combined. For years, Ethan had blamed his paycheck for being too small. Now, he was staring at proof that some of the problem had been his habits. And the truth hit harder than any warning letter. Ethan's monthly take-home pay was $3,200, and for the first time, he compared it against every dollar he spent. After adding everything together, he discovered nearly $650 a month was disappearing into habits he barely remembered making. That meant more than 20% of his income had been leaking away without a plan. The coffee runs alone were costing him almost $180 every month. Convenience store snacks added another $140. Food delivery apps had quietly drained nearly $330. For the first time, Ethan could finally see where the money was actually going. The next morning, he brought the notebook with him and reviewed the numbers during his lunch break. A coworker walking past noticed the pages covered with expenses and stopped to look. Then the coworker asked a question Ethan wasn't expecting. "Are you trying to fix your finances?" Marcus opened the ledger to show a column labeled with exact categories. Marcus explained that every single dollar must receive a specific job immediately. Ethan stared at the neat lines, realizing his money had no direction. Most people simply spend what remains after paying their monthly bills. Therefore, their bank accounts constantly drain down to zero by month's end. But successful planning means assigning your entire income on paper first. Marcus pointed to a clean section dedicated entirely to unexpected emergencies. This small fund prevents a single car breakdown from destroying your progress. But Ethan gripped his pencil tightly as the simple math became perfectly clear. Ethan assigned every dollar a purpose before spending it. Rent, groceries, gas, and debt finally had their place. He protected part of his paycheck for emergencies. The blank sheet became a plan instead of a burden. For the first time, the numbers stopped feeling impossible. Small spending cuts revealed hidden breathing room. A quiet sense of hope replaced constant panic. Then his phone buzzed with unexpected news. His mother's prescription costs had suddenly increased. Ethan stared at the expense, wondering if his new plan would survive. Ethan decided it was time for small sacrifices to begin. He skipped his usual morning coffee stop on the way. Lunch became a simple sandwich packed from home. He cancelled the streaming service he rarely watched. Ethan walked instead of driving short distances. He reviewed every subscription and cut 3 of them. The saved dollars went straight into his new plan. Week 1 showed his first small victory on paper. He felt the shift happening, one choice at a time. Then, he opened his banking app to make the deposit. Ethan gathered his saved cash for the first emergency fund deposit. He drove to the bank with $98 ready. At the teller window, he made his very first deposit. He also gave some money to his mother for her medications. The receipt showed his new emergency fund balance. Ethan felt proud walking back to his delivery van. He updated his budget sheet that same evening. Small, consistent actions were finally building something real. His mother smiled when she received the help. The first $100 now sat safely in the fund. Ethan watched his emergency fund grow with each new deposit. He added extra money from overtime shifts on his route. His budget became easier to follow week after week. Ethan kept making small cuts that added real progress. He reviewed his numbers every Sunday evening without fail. The fund balance climbed past $200 steadily. He started planning ahead for bigger expenses with confidence. But then, a surprise medical bill arrived in the mail. Ethan stared at the unexpected charge for his mother. The test of his new system had come sooner than expected. Ethan opened the medical bill and saw the amount due. He checked his emergency fund balance on the phone. The fund now covered most of his mother's medical cost. Ethan transferred money from the fund to pay the bill. He felt the system working exactly as planned. No new credit card debt was added this time. Ethan updated his budget to rebuild the fund quickly. He made extra deliveries that week to recover faster. The emergency fund dropped, but stayed above zero. His confidence grew, even as he used the money wisely. Ethan refused to put the remaining bill on his credit card. He searched for cheaper medication options with his mother. Ethan worked extra hours instead of borrowing any money. He stuck strictly to his written budget every single day. No new debt appeared on his credit card statements. Ethan and his mother reviewed the payment plan together. He rebuilt his fund with every spare dollar earned. The temptation to use credit cards grew weaker each week. Ethan felt stronger, knowing he had broken the old cycle. His emergency fund slowly started climbing back upward again. Ethan visited his mother more often without money worries. He helped Linda with groceries using his new budget. Ava noticed her brother no longer asked for loans. Ethan and his sister shared a calm conversation about money. He joined family dinners without the usual tension. Linda thanked him for the steady support with medications. Ethan felt closer to his family than he had in years. Small, consistent help replaced the old arguments and stress. His mother smiled more during their weekly calls. The improved relationships became his biggest reward. Ethan paid off another large chunk of his personal loan. The credit card balances finally started dropping noticeably. He reached a major debt milestone after consistent payments. Ethan crossed off one full credit card from his list. He celebrated quietly by updating his progress chart. The total debt number looked much smaller on paper now. Ethan shared the good news with his mother, Linda. Ava congratulated him during their next phone call. Everything felt possible after this major debt milestone. Ethan eliminated over $15,000 of debt. He built a solid $5,000 emergency fund. Ethan stopped relying on credit cards completely. His relationships with Ava and Linda grew much stronger. Ethan finally regained full control of his future. The zero-based budget and emergency fund system worked. Small, consistent choices created massive, lasting change. Ethan opened his banking app one peaceful morning. For the first time in years, the numbers no longer scared him. The biggest lesson Ethan learned was something called a zero-based budget. Every dollar had a job before the month even began. Once Ethan started telling his money where to go, he stopped wondering where it went. The problem was never that he earned too little. The real problem was that small, unplanned purchases were quietly stealing thousands of dollars every year. Coffee runs, impulse shopping, forgotten subscriptions, convenience spending, and emotional purchases slowly drained his future. Ethan fixed the problem by tracking every expense, eliminating unnecessary spending, building an emergency fund, and paying debt consistently. You can do the exact same thing by writing down every expense, creating a zero-based budget, and questioning every purchase before making it. If a purchase doesn't move you closer to your goals, delay it, review it, and decide if you truly need it. Small choices repeated every day can completely change your financial future, just like they changed Ethan's.